And now, to lead us in our meditation, Reverend Cynthia Briggs.
Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to see you and be back with you. It's been a while, and it's just nice to look around Zoom and see all your smiling faces. So welcome, and welcome to any of our visitors who may be here for the first time. So let's just take a deep breath in. And as we release, if you're comfortable, you can close your eyes or have a soft gaze off of your device. And just come into the centering of your heart. Coming fully into this time together, into this service. And this morning, as we reflect inwardly and bring ourselves into that centering place, our meditation this morning is on the remembrance of those who have served. Those who have served. So we have Remembrance Day coming up on the 11th, as we all know, or most of us know. And so as you bring to heart and mind the breath, also bring to heart and mind those men and women and people of all identities who have served to bring peaceful lands and harmony and unity in Canada and in the world. So all the Canadians who have done this in service have sacrificed, given their lives. And there may be someone in your life, or more than one person in your life who you know who has served. So bringing them to heart and mind. In our lives, in Will and my life, Will's uncle, Gerard, died. We never met him. He died at the tender age of 18, 19, within a month of serving in the front lines of the Battle of the Bulge in 1944. And Will's family, his mother, who was a young woman then, a teenager, really found out about the death on Christmas Eve. She lived with that sorrow. And Gerard lives in our hearts as we bring remembrance, and you bring remembrance in your heart of who has served. And bowing to them and giving honor and respect, regardless of how you feel about the military or about war. These beloved people, these beloved humans have sacrificed their lives and given their time and life and service for everyone. And we know the prayer of protection that is part of the unity services all over the world. And we speak the prayer of protection at the end of every service. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. The presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. This prayer of protection was written by James Dilbert Freeman, who was a unity minister, and he wrote it at the request of Silent Unity in 1940 when the World War II was raging in Europe. And people around the world since then and now, and the years in between have carried that prayer with them They've carried it in their hearts, they've carried it in their pocketbooks, they've carried it in their wallets, in their shirt pockets, they've carried it in their minds, and they've held that closely, whether they've been part of unity or not. This prayer has gone to the moon and has been left by astronauts on the moon 2 times. So as we sit in this meditation time for the next few minutes, I invite you to repeat the prayer of protection in remembrance and in honor of all who have served. And you might change the word slightly to the light of God surrounds you as you imagine this person or these people. The love of God surrounds you, enfolds you. The power of God protects you. The presence of God watches over you. Wherever you are, God is, and all is well. Let's just take a few minutes just to be with the prayer of protection. Be with that remembrance of honoring, and you yourself may have served in the Canadian military and have served time. So honor that, honor yourself, honor your service, whatever feels right to you in this moment. And we'll sit in this silence for just a few minutes. Just as you bring this remembrance and love to your heart, breathe in light and breathe out love. Breathe in love and breathe out peace. Breathe in peace and breathe out God. And as we move through the days of this week, and in particular on the 11th, November 11th at 11 a.m., the 11th month, this is the tradition of taking that day, that time at 11 a.m. to remember. But we can remember always. So anytime that you are moved, you can bring the prayer of protection into your heart and send that love and that protection to those in your life who have given their lives in service to humanity. Peace be with you.
And now I hope you'll join me in welcoming our speaker this morning, Dr. Will Keepin.
Thank you, Shirley, and thank you, Nathan, for that beautiful song and this beautiful service. I'd like to begin this morning with the first unity principle. There is only one presence and one power active as the universe and as my life. God, the good, omnipotence. That comes from the Unity website. And at Unity, we repeat this every time we gather, and rightly so. This is the first principle of unity, and in some ways, it's the very foundation from which all the other principles follow. We call this principle God. Sometimes it's expressed as there is only one presence and one power in the universe and in my life. Other times, one power and one present, active as the universe and as my life. This presence and power is active. It doesn't just sit idle. It is always loving, always creating. This is direct quoting now from the Unity website. Even when we are not consciously creating, Spirit is. It is active as my life, as the universe, as everything. Wherever I look, there God is. So that is the articulation of the first unity principle. Now, I want to invite you today to look at this a little more closely. There is one there is one power and presence operating as the universe and as my life. This seems to me to be nothing other than a restatement of the ancient Hermetic principle, as above, so below. The principle that affirms that the oneness of God functions as the cosmos and as you. This is the great insight across the mystical traditions, that the inner essence of the human being is none other than the essence of the transcendent Godhead. As the Upanishads put it, what is here is there. What is not here is nowhere. So what is up there in the highest heavens is here in the deepest depths of our own being. Both Plato and Ibn Arabi put this succinctly. They said, there is one being. That's it. All is one. This means there are intrinsic connections and correlations between every aspect of the cosmos and every aspect of you. Everything is connected to everything else. This is not just a metaphor. It is the living reality of our cosmos. So what are these connections? How are our earthly lives connected to the heavens above? And since everything is connected to everything else, how are our lives down here below on Earth connected to the planets, stars, the galaxies, up there above? How is the light of the constellations connected to the fire in the heart of the lover of God? These connections are loosely dubbed quantum entanglement in quantum physics. Quantum entanglement, and translated into plain English, means everything is interconnected. Quantum entanglement arises naturally in physics when two particles are created at the same time and point in space, and they remain connected. Entangled particles may thereafter become widely separated in space, but no matter how far apart they get, the mathematics of quantum theory requires any measurement on one particle immediately influences the other, regardless of how far away it is. Now, this is what Einstein called spooky action at a distance, and he didn't like it. But it has since been experimentally verified. It has been proven it is the quantum reality of our existence. Broadly interpreted, what it simply means is because all particles in the universe were created all at once in the Big Bang, they are all entangled with one another. So quantum entanglement between all quantum particles in the universe, this is what generates the holographic dynamic nature of that same universe. In short, the universe is a fractally organized dynamic hologram or holoverse, which physicist David Bohm called the holo movement. Now, that's enough for the moment of the fancy scientific terminology. Don't be intimidated by it. These same interconnections have also been known in a different domain in a very archetypally precise way in the ancient science of archetypal cosmology, better known by the accursed name, if you will, of astrology. So I know that astrology can be a significant pill to swallow for people. I want to invite you on a journey with me this morning to at least consider this ancient discipline. Astrology is the parent of modern science. Astronomy is the offspring of astrology. And in some ways, I would submit that astronomy is still in its adolescent rebellion against its parent, because there is this thorough rejection of astrology by science. And in some ways for good reason, because astrology has been widely abused and because there was a kind of fear and loathing imposed in past eras around living under the cloud of the planets. But even the Bible speaks of astrologers and makes frequent reference to the consultation of astrologers. The three wise men who came to Jesus at the moment of his birth, as it is understood in the Bible, came from three separate places. They met up as they approached Bethlehem. They were all connected to that deeper knowing that is written in the stars. And they were able to read that language and follow its inner message, and that led them to Bethlehem. And that written in the stars is very reminiscent of what is called the holographic principle, in which the current, one of the most leading scientific theories that unifies quantum theory with relativity theory in modern physics, in other words, puts it all together in a theory of everything, is called the holographic principle. And the holographic principle says that this entire universe that we experience as a universe is but a projection of a higher dimensional hyperspace. And so there's a way in which there is a higher dimensional spiritual reality, if you will. And everything that happens here is a consequence, a projection, a manifestation of that higher spiritual reality. This is contemporary cutting edge of science is saying this. So now back to this, everything's connected to everything else. If that's true, then there are necessarily some kinds of connections between us humans and the planets of our solar system and the galaxies of our and our constellations. Not just physical connections of some form, but consciousness connections. And this is what Carl Jung discovered, and he gave it the name synchronicity. synchronicity is what he called the acausal link that connects meaning with matter. It connects experiential psychological events with physical events. And he gives many examples. I'm sure you maybe have heard of some of them, with the scarab outside his window when he was doing therapy on one of his patients. And she had a dream about this bug. And then right as she finished her dream, he heard this scratching at the window, and he went and he opened the door, and there was right at the window a bug of exactly the kind that she'd had in her dream, the scarab. And she had a major revelation. There was a synchronicity there. There was a connection between her inner psychological experience and this little bug somehow felt maybe called, or God directed it there, or who knows how it happened. There's no logical explanation, but there's a connection between spirit and matter. And that connection has been lost, particularly in the West. And we need to reclaim it, because we are living in a sense of separation from the cosmos, from our environment. Even the word environment implies something elsewhere that's around us. We don't live in an environment. We are embedded in nature. We are a living part of nature, and nature is in us, and we are in nature. So Jung and one of the founders of quantum mechanics, Wolfgang Pauli, collaborated on these whole questions of how do we put physics and psyche together. Very pioneering work they did over 100 years ago. And Pauli said, to find its natural place in a religion of wholeness, an emotional response to the archetypal background of natural science is needed. It's a very pregnant statement. To find its natural place in a religion of wholeness, that's oneness. He's speaking about this first unity principle, an emotional response to the archetypal background of natural science. What is that archetypal background of natural? What's underlying it all? And I want to suggest to you that underlying it all are the esoteric sciences. Astrology, alchemy, I Ching, the Tarot, the sciences of paranormal phenomena, telepathy, divination, telekinesis, the science of near-death experience and mediumship. All of these are the esoteric sciences. And as the Dalai Lama has spoken to this, and I'll come to this in a moment, but this is an essential element of the integration that astrology has been seeking and articulating for millennia. Now, let me hasten to add that I understand that astrology is anathema. And I'm inviting you on this journey because I realize it's like it has been so rejected by both science and religion that it's understandably poo-pooed. And I felt that same way. When I first encountered it, it was through Stan Grof. And I encountered it with him when I was doing a training with him 32 years ago. And through that, I met Rick Tarnas. And Rick Tarnas was Stan's colleague, and he brought this whole understanding of the possible correlations between planetary and human affairs. And the way it came about for Stan was that he was working with, mental health patients in the clinic in Prague, Czechoslovakia, and he had 22 patients. And a astrologer approached him and said, well, he'd like to analyze the charts. And at that time, Stan was trying to understand the connections between these powerful experiences that his clients were having with this psychedelic methodology. He was working with them because he gave them LSD. That was part of the treatment. And their experiences. And he was using Myers-Briggs and MMPI and different psychological personality profiles and getting nowhere. There was no connection, no pattern. And this astrologer came back after a couple of weeks and said, out of those clients, 20 will do fine and 2 of them will have major problems. And here's the nature of the problems. And he was able to pinpoint the very nature of the kind of challenges these 2 clients were having. And so against every scientific bone in Stan's body, he began to go into studying what could astrology, how could he have figured this out just based on the birth data of these people alone? So that was the opening. And I'll show you in a minute a little more detail about how it unfolds, but I want to say that it was a major challenge for me as a scientist. It was so contrary to my scientific training. And at some point after studying and immersing myself in this, I literally had a whole kind of revelation into this cosmic oneness. And I had a sense, and I was studying with Stan and also with Richard Tarnas, who's the author of the book Cosmos and Psyche. I had a sense at one point that the back half of my head had actually been removed, and I could perceive this planetary presences all circulating around there. Now, that's something I don't usually speak about, but it was something that was palpable for a number of weeks, and I spoke to Rick Tarnas about it, and he understood it. I was careful not to speak to just anyone about it, because they might say, yeah, well, it came off. You're right, the back half of your head came off, and all the marbles that were in there went out with them. And now you've kind of lost it, my friend. So this is kind of the view of astrology. It is just beyond the pale of acceptability. I'll give you one more example. When I was in 2005, I was invited in India to a conference on Teilhard de Chardin and Sri Aurobindo, the kind of pillars of Eastern and Western spirituality. And I went to that conference and I gave a talk on fractals in science, the whole thing, my whole fractal piece, all of that. They loved it. I got very good feedback. They invited me back with great enthusiasm the next year. Well, where it goes from there is to my understanding of the most important application of all of that, which is archetypal cosmology or astrology. And Rick Tarnas's book was coming out the next month. And so I thought, well, this is the perfect place. India, of all places, where they are open to these things. There's astrology all over India. This is the place. I'll do my debut. And I gave a talk on astrology, a more expanded version of what I'm giving you here. And it did not go well at all. I mean, the talk went well, but the reception was terrible. And I was told by the conference organizers I should not have done that. They wished I hadn't done that. I found out later that the funder of the whole thing was the head of the Templeton Foundation here in the US or in North America, and they were not happy. And since they were not happy, the whole conference people were not happy. Well, I didn't mean to tread on any toes. I was just speaking to where it naturally leads. This is where fractals plus oneness takes you. If you take quantum entanglement and fractal geometry, you get an astrological hermeneutic. You can't avoid it. But anyway, so that's a story of how that was not so welcome. Although, last thing, many individual scientists came up to me in the hallways, making sure that no one was looking. And then they asked me more. They wanted to know more. What is this book? This is fascinating. But they didn't want to be seen asking me. That's how repressed this esoteric knowledge is. So I want to now bring you to, I'm going to shift gears and go to the slides here. So hang on. And as I screen share, sorry, just give me a second here. You know, I'm always a little slow. I'm not quite a boomer. I mean, a baby. I am a boomer. That's the problem. If I was a young person, millennial type, this would all happen so elegantly, like the way that Garrett does it, you wouldn't even notice. Okay, here we go. I think this is us. And if I share it, and then I put it on slides, here we are. Okay, so the internet of the heart, as I like to call it, as you know. Okay, so here's where we start. The Dalai Lama, I think I've shared this with you before, but this captures the whole essence of it. He said in a talk that I heard in 1990, if you want to understand the deepest secrets of the universe, there's 4 steps. First, explore the outer visible universe. Second, the inner invisible cosmos. Third, the relationship between the two. And fourth, from these 3, you can then discover the deepest secrets of the universe. Now, here's the thing. The first one is essentially Western science, the science of the physical universe. The second one you might call, quote, Eastern science or religious science, spiritual science, the whole realm of the inner invisible. The third is the relationship between these two. That's those esoteric traditions that I mentioned, astrology, I Ching, Tarot, etc. And then from all three of these, you have to put them all together, and then you can discover the deeper secrets of the universe. So I want to share with you now a very short excerpt. It's 4 minutes. This is a sneak preview from a movie that's going to be released next spring. It's a 10-part documentary series that is a whole presentation and introduction to this whole arena of astrology and its particular relevance at this time in our current social cultural evolution by exploring the particular relationships that are activated in the last 12 years, the Uranus and Pluto archetypes. Without going into detail, I'm just going to play one short segment from this movie, which has yours truly articulating the basis of these. Let me just say this is, as I said, a 10-part documentary film. It's co-directed by Kenny Azabel, the founder of Bioneers. This is a rough version without a finished sound mix, and I'm showing it with permission. It does have watermarks in some of the videos, just ignore those. There is a trailer on YouTube, and you can sign up for that there if you're more interested in this. And here we go. Oh, wait, I think I need to go back. Something I forgot. Stop share. And then I share again. And I have to optimize for computer sound and screen. And now do it again. I am so sorry. This is my ineptitude at Zoom, but I've now got it to where I think you can actually hear the thing. And here we go. Let me return to this. And now to this. The current understanding, scientific understanding of consciousness is just barely beginning, and we have no real data. The usual assumption is that consciousness is an epiphenomenon or a side. The current understanding, scientific understanding of consciousness is just barely beginning, and we have no real data. The usual assumption is that consciousness is an epiphenomenon or a side effect of the neurophysiology of the brain, and this is now being deeply questioned. I was trained as a mathematical physicist, and I began my early research was in quantum mechanics. Somehow science didn't address all of the questions that I was interested in about the fundamental nature of reality. I did a 3-year intensive training with the psychiatrist Stanislav Grof in the late 1980s, and he had Rick Tarnas, who came in as guest faculty. And Rick introduced transit astrology. Rick presented a whole range of data, which at first I found really too much to believe. The whole understanding of astrology is so completely contradictory to the normal Western scientific training. It seemed completely preposterous that the planets could possibly have anything to do with human affairs in any possible way, because it really requires a complete and radical change of worldview. I did eventually find some answers, partly in the work of David Bohm, and also in chaos theory and fractal geometry. David Bohm was a very important physicist because he was a colleague of Einstein's, and he was one of the leaders in quantum physics. He had been a leading researcher. He was at Princeton University, actually worked with Einstein there. After 40 years of work on this, he proposed that the nature of reality is what he called a hollow movement. He said the cosmos is a single unbroken wholeness in flowing movement, in which each part of the flow contains the entire flow. And he showed that, first of all, it is a oneness. There is one unitive process, very similar to Plato, who said there is one living being. So one of the expressions of the Hermetic axiom that we find in Hindu and Buddhist cosmology is something that's called Indra's net. And Indra's net is a very beautiful metaphor that the ancient mystics used to describe the nature of reality and the nature of the one to the many. You imagine a lattice of beautiful glistening jewels,
And you look in the facets of any one jewel, and what you see reflected there are all the others. But now if we take this image of Indra's net and we add temporal and spatial variation, meaning that we get them all moving, and we make them of all different sizes, and we make some of those jewels gigantic, like planetary sizes. Now if we take one of those little jewels, what we'll see is the movements of all the others reflected there. There is one unitive process of consciousness that is manifesting on multiple scales of time and space simultaneously everywhere. Because of that, there are correlations between what's happening in the microcosm of human consciousness and the macrocosm of the solar system and beyond. Astrology is the consequence of this fundamental fractal or holographic structure of consciousness as it comes into manifestation in material form in space and time. That energetic dynamic between Uranus and Pluto at the planetary scale, it's happening also at the consciousness scale within each of us. And this is the reason that we find these correlations of social transformation and revolution, and directly relates to the whole realm of what we call archetypes in psychology.
Okay, thank you for that. Sorry for my, back and forth on the screen share. So bottom line here is that, as we know, as I've spoken about before, fractals are modern scientific discovery of this ancient Hermetic principle, as above, so below. And this is what is responsible for these connections with the planets. We have this connection, as I've shared before, throughout nature. You've seen these images of fractals like the broccoli, where each nodule is a replica of the whole, or the brain cells have the same structural patterns as the entire universe. And this concept of Indra's net, this is an image that I referred to in that film, where each jewel reflects all the others in its reflection, in its surface. And so there's a certain sense that each part contains the whole. Now, this is expressed beautifully in this wonderful statement that really is essentially an astrological statement, if you will. God is an infinite circle whose center is everywhere and circumference is nowhere. And what this means is that each of us contains the entire universe within the depths of our own center. That in some sense, radical as it sounds, the infinity of the cosmos is contained within each one of us. And just to give you an idea of how that actually works, this is a small little video that I made that sort of gives the essence of this. It's a fractal, it's part of the Mandelbrot set, but you can just imagine that big circular pattern here in the center. That is essentially representing, let's say, the solar system. And then these here might be the Earth scale, and this might be another planet. And I'm going to move forward here to just get to the essence of this. So if we now turn rotating the colors, you'll see that there's a kind of unitive pattern, dynamic pattern taking place, because astrology is a dynamic correlation. And now if we zoom in, we're zooming in down at the bottom to just one of these points of light. So it's like one of these centers. God is an infinite center, an infinite circle whose center is everywhere. Here's one of the centers. And if we keep zooming in, it just keeps going. We see that the infinity of the macrocosm is replicated here in the depths of this tiny little point. And notice it just keeps going no matter how deep we go. So this shows you a visual of how the infinity of the entire cosmos is contained in the tiny little speck of the point that is you. What that says is this: if you identify with your form, you are a tiny little speck in the universe. Look at the tiny size of that little dot. So if we identify with our physical form, we are but a tiny speck, a seemingly meaningless speck. But if we identify with our essence, we are one with the very essence of God. Now let's move up into that upper left-hand side. You can see my little cursor moving around up there. And we're centering in on a point up there, another point. And we're going to zoom in on that point. And we'll see what we find. But the whole point of this is that every single point of light throughout the universe is like each one of them is one of these centers, that God is an infinite circle whose center is everywhere. So here it is up here. We zoom into one of these centers. And as we zoom in, what do we find? We find that same macrocosmic unfolding evolution precisely replicated in the depths of this interior center. So this is the essence of how astrology, or rather archetypal cosmology, works. And it really is the deeper meaning of this principle, as above, so below, that the entire universe is replicated inside you and inside me. So this is where I make the parallel between what happens in this kind of mathematical structure that we've just seen, which is a visual depiction of what I'm speaking about, and the structure of religions, in which instead of a fractal formula like you see here, there is a word, a sacred word, the word. In the beginning was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God. Or in Hinduism, Om. Or in Buddhism, Om Mani Padme Hum. Or in Islam, Allah. And Kun, where God says, be. And this comes into being, the word, and then through the word comes creation. And from this, as you've seen before, all of the religions are manifest in this structure of ontological superstructure, where each one is born of the sacred word uttered by the absolute. Each one is a unique revelation of the absolute that is fractalated, if you will, into manifestation and gives rise to those different traditions here on the plane of creation. This is so similar to the holographic principle. This is a depiction of the holographic principle, where you have at the highest heavens, if you will, the code, a two-dimensional surface here, in this case, in physics, of a kind of a sacred code, and all the information of the entire universe is contained and written on that surface, the same way that the information is written in the stars that creates the cosmos. And then the cosmos itself floats as this projection of that supreme spiritual scripture written in the language and voice of God. And that gives rise to creation. Now, in astrology, this has implications in terms of the planets. And I'm going to not go into greater detail here, because this can go on and on, but simply to say that the planets are correlated with certain aspects of human affairs. And this has been demonstrated statistically in science. However, the key thing to understand about astrology, this is a photograph of the planet Mars. The key thing to understand in astrology is that the planets are basically, they are correlated with human affairs, but a given astrological archetype functions very much like the Schrödinger wave equation. It is a spectrum of possibilities. And this is very important to understand, because in quantum physics, the wave equation, the Schrödinger equation, gives a range of different possible outcomes with a probability of each one. The exact same thing is true for astrological indicators and astrological archetypes. Each archetype is multivalent. It has a range of different possible manifestations. And which one is chosen in the case of quantum physics is not really understood. It's called the collapse of the wave function. It's also not fully understood in astrology, but the process is the same. The astrological archetype manifests as a particular destiny. In the case of astrology, however, free will comes into play. We do have a say. And as human beings, we make certain choices that enable or increase the likelihood of certain divine destinies. So we live into our destiny by choosing those spiritual qualities within us, or choosing those darker qualities within us. So I'm going to briefly skip over this part, except to say that these correlations that have been found statistically show that Mars is associated with being on the eastern horizon or directly overhead with greater than expected statistical frequency for sports champions. So champions who are leaders in sports, you find that Mars tends to be on the eastern horizon or directly overhead more often than it should be. And you find the same thing with scientists for the planet Saturn, with writers for the planet Moon, with actors, with the planet Jupiter, etc. And the probability of these things by chance is less than 1 in 5 million. I'm saying these things simply to let you know that there is statistical evidence now for these things. And this is now being greatly amplified by the most recent developments in astrological research, because the computing power and the statistical methods are multi-factor instead of single factor. And so what is emerging is a whole body of data now that stands unrefuted and unexplained by conventional science. And what's happening, as it did 125 years ago when quantum physics first came out, is most scientists ignore it. And these data are simply too hard to comprehend, so they're simply set aside and not paid attention to. And so the scientists' names like Michel Gauquelin and Sweetbert Ertel and Kyösti Tarvainen, who's one of the leaders now from Finland, who is developing this to a very advanced degree, are completely unknown. This research remains mostly unknown in mainstream scientific community. But I will submit to you, this research stands in the same place that the photoelectric effect did 125 years ago, that the Michelson-Morley experiment, which led to relativity theory, did 125 years ago. These were experiments that won't go away. And there were thousands of experiments that showed no quantum or relativistic effects. And there were a small number of these experiments that did and could not be eliminated and could not be explained. And they eventually toppled the entire edifice of classical physics and replaced it with quantum physics. And my conviction is that we're going to see a similar replacement of our current scientific worldview with a whole integrated cosmic, astrological, or I would say archetypal, cosmological revelation, in which these data are taken seriously, and in which people realize that we are fundamentally interconnected with the stars. So if you start with astrology, science, you end up with astrology. That's my conviction. Now, last point of this talk this morning. If we start with religion, where do we end up? Here is the Christian Trinity, right? Father, Son, Holy Spirit, represented as a sacred triangle. As we know, and as I've shared before, so I'll go through this quickly, that's only half the story because it only has the masculine side of God. There's a missing counterpart, the Sophianic Trinity, which is the feminine Trinity, God as eternal mother, daughter, or Sophia, and the Holy Soul. We put these together according to various sophiologists, and we get this 6-pointed star. And that still has Father on top, Mother on the bottom. So I've reversed it a little bit and put them side by side. Here we still have the same 6-pointed star. This is really esoteric Christianity, if you will. And then if we add in Hinduism, we take that same structure, but we add the Hindu deity of Ardhanishvara, which combines the masculine and feminine into a single deity. And then we add the as above, so below. So we add a similar point below. And this gives us this figure with the Godhead on top, creation on the bottom, and that is none other than the Kabbalah. This we have just created, we started with the Christian Trinity, we added in the Sophianic feminine part of the Trinity, we added in the Hindu tradition, and we get the Jewish mystical tradition of the Kabbalah. And the Kabbalah itself has been closely correlated with, guess what, astrology. Each one of those esoteric sephirot, as they're called in the Kabbalah, is directly correlated with one of the planetary archetypes. So what we find, and in fact, there's a whole tradition of Kabbalistic astrology. So what we find is that if you start with science, you end up in astrology. If you start with religion, you end up in astrology. Really now, that is very radical, isn't it? I want to just close by saying that I feel strongly that this tradition of archetypal cosmology, which has been so rejected by both science and religion, will one day become the ground on which they will find a deep and healing reconciliation. As we all know, when you want to heal something, you always try to find common ground between the warring parties. And both science and religion share the common ground of both detesting astrology, rejecting it out of hand. But it wasn't always so. And with the modern scientific depth of insight and statistical research supporting these subtle and profound connections between the soul and the physical aspects of the cosmos and the higher elements, as Dwal Kul says, the great esotericist, he says the deepest secrets of astrology will be realized, excuse me, when we realize that there are interlocking triangles of force that connect the chakras of the human system with literally not just the planets, but with the Pleiades and with the Ursa Major, which is the Big Dipper constellation. And the 7 stars in each of those are directly connected with the 7 chakras of the human being at a level of astrological influence that is far more subtle and deep than is even recognized in contemporary astrology. So these things go to a deep level. And these masters of esoteric wisdom have really perceived the oneness in this remarkable way. So I just close by saying that I invite you to consider these possibilities. If you want more information, I can provide it. There's lots of information on YouTube and there's a lot of misinformation. So I put this forward as something that will eventually help to heal the separation between the human species and the rest of the cosmos, in which we are a living, embedded unity. Amen.